Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our next session for DigiFest 2020. So we're moving into a panel discussion focusing on reflections on 2020 and imperatives for 2021. So I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Davidson, who's going to chair the panel. Sarah, as many of you will know, is Chief Executive of Carnegie UK, and Carnegie has been doing a lot of work and published some very useful recent reports on the whole focus on digital access and inclusion. So I'll hand over to Sarah, who will introduce the panel. Thank you, Sarah.
Good morning, thanks very much, and welcome to everyone to this next session at DigiFest today. We're going to be continuing that theme of looking back on 2020 and looking ahead to 2021. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Tessa this morning and also from the Cabinet Secretary and the COSLA spokesperson. I think it's always really good on these occasions to lift your eyes from the local perspective and to place that firmly in what's happening in a global context. So I really appreciated that, those insights into what's been happening in Denmark. As Margaret just said, I'm Sarah Davidson, the chair of the Carnegie UK Trust, and I'm delighted to be chairing today's panel, which includes many people that I have worked with in the past, but also have worked with on some of the important issues we've all been addressing this year. Before I turn to my colleagues here today, though, I wanted to start by giving a few organisational perspectives from Carnegie on the issues that we're thinking about today. So we just heard from the Cabinet Secretary, and she talked at the beginning of the discussion about the silver lining of the pandemic experience. I think, as she herself indicated, we all feel slightly uncomfortable when it comes to acknowledging that an experience as traumatic as a pandemic can contain the seeds of more positive change. But in my own sector, the philanthropic one, there's a really open acknowledgement that out of great disruptions can come the acceleration of change that everybody knew was needed already, but there was maybe never quite the time or the attention or the collective will or the opportunity to make them real. I heard someone speaking on a podcast recently, and what they said was, it might not feel quite right to talk about silver linings and pandemics, but frankly, if we're going to go through all this trouble, we absolutely owe it to ourselves to make sure that we grab any positive opportunities that we can find. And I think that's very much the spirit of DigiFest this year. At Carnegie UK, we are firmly of the view that one of those positive opportunities is recognition of the fact that digital technology is absolutely central in supporting personal, community and societal well-being, and that it can be for everyone. The consistent message in the keynote today and from the discussion we've just heard is about a rapid scaling in the use of tech in health and care, and critically, that is something which is welcomed by both patients and their families and by clinicians. You don't need me to enumerate the ways in which the lockdown experience has put technology even more firmly at the heart of essential infrastructure, as it became the way in which millions of us shopped, accessed education, and of course, accessed health and care services. No one, I hope, can now credibly suggest that digital can be a fringe interest for public service organisations, tucked away in the IT department somewhere and not at the heart of organisational strategies. However, it's also important that we recognise that overnight escalation in the role and importance of technology has its shadow side. It exposes a range of risks to well-being, including issues around exclusion, personal privacy, and information quality and security. COVID-19 has starkly exposed the significant social justice issues in relation to access to and use of digital technology. We know that those most likely to be disadvantaged digitally are also those most likely to be disadvantaged according to a range of social or economic measures. And the impact of that is a risk that technology rapidly deepens existing inequalities in society. And that's an issue which we at Carnegie are committed to highlighting, and delighted to have another opportunity to do so in this forum today. We have been delighted to be a part of the Scottish Government and others on the Connecting Scotland initiative this year. And it's my personal hope that the rapid scaling of the use of technology by the universal health and education services may just turn out to create that tipping point that brings the necessary attention and resources to addressing digital exclusion in Scotland. One of the most exciting things to me about the spread of services like Near Me is the fact that this is a responsive relational public service of the kind that's been slower to emerge on a digital platform. We're in no doubt that a priority for the recovery has to be an acceleration of efforts to support the design, delivery and engagement with this kind of service, and not simply those that operate on a transactional basis, which have maybe grown more rapidly in past years. So our imperatives for the future will come as no surprise to you. They are that we should all learn from the immediate response and recognise and celebrate these short-term efforts to tackle exclusion and to bridge gaps in service provision. They are really, really important, and we shouldn't rush on to the next thing without pausing to examine them and, as I say, to celebrate them. But we now need to use these as a platform for a committed medium-term ambition to solve the digital exclusion issues that the crisis has exposed. And at the same time, ambitious plans need to be designed and put in place to support the statutory and voluntary services to deliver the highest quality digital services, which work on this relational as well as transactional basis, addressing critical issues such as infrastructure and staff development. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite each panel member in turn to share their key reflection from 2020 and their personal imperative for the future. After we've heard from each of them, I will chair a panel discussion, and then we'll be coming to you to ask for your questions. So please do get those down, and either things which you've come holding today already or things which are prompted by what you hear from the panel members. I'm going to come first to Caroline Lamb, the Joint Chair of the Digital Health and Care Portfolio Board, and invite Caroline to share her reflections and imperatives with us. Caroline, over to you. Do we have Caroline here? No, I'll just give her a moment, and if Caroline doesn't come up, then I'm going to come to Lorraine McMillan and invite her to speak to us. Lorraine, would you like to pick up from here with your reflection on 2020 and imperative for 2021 and the future beyond?
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks for that introduction, which I think gave us a good sense of what it feels like just now. And I think the comments you made about silver linings during a pandemic, we are all very, very uncomfortable about talking about that. But something good has to come of this really, really terrible time we've been through. And when I reflect back on it, when I think back in the year, now I guess we need to be a wee bit further away from this year to have a more valid reflection. But two things have been the strengths I've seen. The first is pace. The pace at which the public sector has moved, at what everyone's moved, because the focus has been very, very clear, which has been to do the best for the most vulnerable in our society, whether those through illness are vulnerable, through poverty, that absolute focus of everybody working together in public, voluntary, whatever, and the speed of decision making, because we had a very clear environment to make that decision in. To do organisation politics were put to the side, so it was all about pace. So I think we'll all say it's one of the most exhausting years of our professional life. Decisions were made very quickly, meetings set up quickly. That pace was energising and exhausting at the same time, and no more so than in digital health and care, where digital health and care has given us so many opportunities to help protect people's lives, make people's lives better in really, really challenging circumstances. And I suppose linked into that, my other reflection is partnership. I have never in my life seen such good partnership working across public and private sector. And digital health and social care is absolutely the forefront of that. The work that has been done across local government, the NHS, Scottish Government and all the partners to absolutely make sure we are doing the best that we can. I'm absolutely delighted if you take the example of Near Me, which really accelerated for the NHS and really helped get to our most challenging people whose connectivity was most challenging in terms of people who were most vulnerable, and Near Me helped them get to medicine and the treatment they needed more quickly. Now in terms of partnership, that will be rolled out through local government for different groups of citizens. So reflection for me was pace and partnership. I think that's what I'm going to remember most about last year. Going forward, what's the imperative? Do you know, I think the imperative is the same, it's pace and partnership. We can't go back to the way we did things before. We need to actually be very focused on the most vulnerable in society and those that need our help, and make decisions at pace to support them, and forget about organisational boundaries, which then leads me on to partnership. That way of working that we have over the last year has to continue. We have done so much together across public, private, voluntary sectors. That absolutely. So for me, those are my two imperatives: pace and partnership moving forward. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. I'm going to come next to David McNeill, Director of Development at Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. David, do you want to tell us your experience of 2020 and hope for the future?
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, I would just echo everything that Lorraine said about pace and partnership. It's been a year of kind of change and achieving things that we perhaps would have thought would have taken us years before. So it's been a real success story in terms of digital delivery, even in a really challenging environment. And I suppose for me, this has been a year where we've lost lots of things that we've taken for granted. For me personally, the big one is hugs. I miss that, and I'm missing all the human contact that would normally would get out of a real life conference like this, normally at the Digital Health and Care event. And we've heard already in the kind of talks this morning that digital is never a replacement for human contact, and that's very true. But can you imagine what it would have been like this year if you were living without an internet access at home, or perhaps the only internet-enabled device that you had was a smartphone and it maybe had a 500 megabyte data allowance for the month? How would you make a decision about how you rationed your data, what you used, what you were able to access? And I think the scary thing is that has been the reality for around 10 to 20% of the adult population in Scotland this year. I remember going for a walk during lockdown and seeing people sitting outside the steps of the closed bars just so that they could access the Wi-Fi on their phones. And I think before this year, there's kind of many public services may have taken it for granted that digital access is ubiquitous and universal. But really this year, some of those safety nets for those without digital access, like libraries, with them being closed, it has really focused the minds of public services across, public, private and voluntary sector on the issue and impact of digital exclusion. And the kind of Connecting Scotland programme has already been mentioned, and we've been working at SCVO with the Scottish Government, with local authorities and hundreds of voluntary sector partners to deliver Connecting Scotland. And that's provided kit, connectivity and digital skills support to tackle digital exclusion, with kind of working towards 50,000 households. Within the kind of total investment of the programme from the Scottish Government being almost kind of 50 million this year, it's clear that tackling that digital exclusion is a top priority for government. And it's also been clear through lots of the conversations that we've had with others, including kind of health and care services and housing, that it's critical for them too. And that's critical. It's a kind of cross-sector approach that's needed to tackle digital exclusion. It's not a standalone issue. It is both a symptom and contributor to the wider issues of poverty and social inclusion. And actually, all services that engage with the most excluded groups play a role in considering what actions are appropriate to tackle digital exclusion. And the difference they can make to people is huge, being digitally included. Through the work on Connecting Scotland, we've heard of the stories of life-changing impact it's had in getting people online, and as well as the benefits of reducing isolation and enabling people to access online support provided by the public and voluntary sector services. It's had some really tangible benefits for health and care services. So just a few stories that we've heard. One, we've heard about stories from patients in remote and rural island communities being able to talk with their consultants online, reducing the stress to the individual having to travel, and also the time and cost of that intervention to the health service. We've had the stories of older people being able to, do things like ordering their prescriptions online, to do exercise classes and engage with support services provided by lots of different organisations, and even doing shopping and talking to friends and relatives online. Brilliant. We've heard from family nurse practitioners and social workers and other practitioners talking about actually by giving people access to an internet connection device and connectivity. It's made their job that they do with individuals so much easier, and they've been delighted to be able to provide that support. And we've heard it's been life-changing for those that have got it. So one of the kind of highlights has been for me to see that collective commitment to tackling digital exclusion. So looking forward to 2021, what do I think the imperative is? That pace and partnership piece that Lorraine mentioned, let's not return to the old ways of working, kind of leave the egos and silos at the door, as we have done this year. Let's recognise the success of transforming services and keep what works. Obviously, that human contact bit is still really important, so let's bring back face-to-face services and contact when it's safe, but recognise in the future that that shouldn't be the default. There are digital ways of doing things. Sometimes they're preferred and better and more efficient and effective. So let's look at continuing what's worked. And importantly, let's all ensure that we continue to embed action to tackle digital exclusion as part of the core part of our work, because it's really crucial that the most excluded groups are not kind of pushed further away from our digital world.
Great, Dave. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to come next to Don Macaskill, the Chief Executive of Scottish Care. Donald, over to you.
Morning, Sarah, and morning, everybody. I suppose it's difficult to reflect back on the last few months without, first of all, acknowledging the devastation, the trauma and the distress which has especially been experienced in the care home sector in Scotland. And I think it's important as we move forward beyond COVID that we don't lose sight of the things that we have lost in terms of, as David said, that physicality, that touch, that being alongside another. But equally, as Lorraine has highlighted, we have seen astonishing pace and astonishing degrees of partnership. And if nothing else, though we've had to social distance, we've allowed social care to come close. People are talking about social care for the first time. It's no longer the mothership NHS. We recognise that there is a totality of well-being which involves keeping people independent, whether in their own home or in a care home, which is just as fundamentally important as the clinical support and services we receive in secondary or primary care. But if I reflect in specific around technology and digital in the last year, I think there are some clear lessons that we've learned. One is we've succeeded where there has been clarity of purpose and practical outcome. Technology has made a difference and people have got on board if they could see and if they could appreciate immediate benefit to them. It's been about putting the person at the centre rather than the system. This has worked, and not least in the care home sector, because we've seen technology at its best has been about enhancing relationship rather than replacing presence. And in some sense, we need to hold on to that as we move forward, because I think at times we get so caught up in the process and the system and the model that we lose sight of the essence, which is that, as you said, Sarah, that relationship and that human presence. I think at the same time, we've appreciated that one of the insights of the last 9 months is that you've got to design with people at the heart, not as an afterthought, but at the centre and at the beginning. And where things have worked well, they have included and involved all stakeholders, not just the usual suspects. And they have been tried and tested and argued about and changed and developed with people being in control of that process. And moving forward, I think that's really critical for us not to become so fundamentalist about the tech that we're not prepared to go back to the beginning, reshape and reform things moving forward. But I think to conclude, we've talked a lot about partnership and working together. And what's made it different in the last 9 months is that we've had a singular focus, which has not just been survival, but safety and improving the experience of people. And at the heart of that partnership working has been trust. We've put aside our usual suspicions of one another. We've got over the nonsense, which is which sector do you come from? Who do you represent? We've seen beyond the shape and the colour of the uniform somebody's worn, and we've seen intention, we've seen purpose, and we've seen direction. And moving forward, we have to, I think, recognise that we still live in an environment in which people are distrustful of technology and digital, perhaps especially in the area of relationship. We've got to, rather than run away from that distrust, work with it, convince people, and share the potential of technology, which ultimately never replaces humanity, but can in so many ways enhance that humanity. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Donald. I'm going to come to Colin Cook, who's the Director of Digital at the Scottish Government. Colin, would you like to look back and look forward for us?
Sarah, and this morning, live example of how people still have difficulty. Unfortunately, I didn't hear the. I hope I don't replicate what here of Donald's contribution, and me feel awkward. Everyone asks me to reflect on the pandemic, because what they're expecting is framed very much in terms of incredible things we've done, but obviously it's not major based. Said that, looking back and taking a spin, I think we've seen incredible speed. Some of I'll use the word arguments we've had for some time about the role of have now won. The need to ensure that we can spin up services quickly, the need to be able to scale services really rapidly, and therefore use modern technologies and get over the hang-ups about not having everything on our premises. The ability to be able to partner very quickly across organizations, exchange data in safe ways, the ability to work with the private sector where that's appropriate to drive innovation into our responses. All of those things have come to the fore, and whether that's the Connecting Scotland programme, getting equipment and data packages people, whether that's the Scottish Tech Army with 1,000 digital experts volunteer to help us, whether that's the work that we've all had to do to get teams working at home and ways. There's been things happening after the last 6 months. To build on that, there's a danger in what has in some cases been very things and hardwiring them might create legacy technical problems down the line. But I think we've got an opportunity to set out an action plan that is commensurate to the level of economic and social shock that we've experienced, and that's why national and local government are consulting on the future of the digital. And what I think is really important, and what has come out and been borne out from the last 6 months, if you look at some of those themes that we are exploring in that strategy, inclusivity is at the heart of that commitment that no one should be left out of or behind from the advantages of digital technology, partly geographical, but increasingly seen through a social lens. And I think that's a really important development. And a second development that I think is equally important is Scotland country needs a national role on these sorts of issues, on ethical, moral, regulatory issues, because they're not going to be solved by one country, and we have an awful lot to learn if we're prepared to take our expertise, take our experience, and engage in finding global solutions to these problems.
Thank you very much, Colin. And then last but not least, I'm going to come to Caroline Lamb, who along with Lorraine is the joint chair of the Digital Health and Care Portfolio Board. Caroline, would you like to complete the suite of backwards and forwards looking for us this morning?
Thanks very much, Sarah. I guess my reflections, I started 2020 as Director of Digital Health and Care at Scottish Government. By the end of March, I found myself leading our response to the requirement to surge our ICU capacity as COVID hit us. In May, I took on leadership of our Test and Protect response, and since August, I've been working on planning the arrangements to be able to start delivering a COVID vaccine very soon, we hope. So it's been a hugely busy year, and it might sound a little bit from that as if I migrated away from that sort of core component of my job around digital health and care and into other stuff. But actually, as I reflect on that, absolutely everything that I've been involved in and all the people I've worked with during the course of what has been an extraordinary period of time have been hugely focused on how we can bolster, in some cases completely transform, the digital and data infrastructures that underpin what we're trying to do, particularly in terms of our response to the pandemic. So when I think about what we've achieved, a web-based contact management system linked to web telephony, which has enabled us to join up every board in Scotland with a national contact tracing centre and to be able to provide mutual aid, pivoting support to areas with outbreaks and areas with just peak positive cases. The Protect Scotland app, which over 1.6 million folk have downloaded. Thank you very much. If you haven't, this is your moment to do it. All the work that's been done to join together data around testing with other components of our digital infrastructure. And what we've been able to do as well in terms of the intelligence that has given us, both supporting the strategic response to the pandemic, but also increasingly making data visible and making data accessible to people in a way that I think will enable us to continue to focus on improving services for people across the piece. In my most recent engagements around the vaccination programme, it feels a bit like stepping into an area that has been a bit devoid, frankly, of digital and data architecture to underpin it. And so for me, what we've been able to do in the last couple of months around standing up a tool that will collect data about vaccinations at point of vaccination, it's not just an essential part of that programme because it is a novel vaccine. We need to make sure that we're in a really strong position to be able to assess how effective it is. But it's also around providing a legacy for the future. And I think that we've achieved a huge amount that we all need to build on. It's not perfect yet. We need to make sure that we're not excluding people. We need to make sure that what we're doing is accessible. There's plenty more for us to do. However, when I reflect as well on how we've achieved what we've achieved, it's really clear to me that some of the pace has been driven by the urgency of our response to the pandemic, which has brought people together with a really single focused mission. And it's helped us to really blur some of the organisational and sectoral boundaries that we so often come up against. It's brought together the best of people in a willingness to collaborate. And interestingly, I think even though we're all having to work in a virtual way, which can be quite challenging, I've definitely seen relationships grow and trust grow across parties who understand the capacity and capability that different organisations bring to the table and are able to really genuinely collaborate. So for the future, I think we need to keep at this. We need to consolidate some of those relationships that have enabled us to achieve so much. We need to remember that there isn't a monopoly on expertise in any one organisation, or understanding in any one organisation or any one part of our whole infrastructure. And I suppose a final reflection from me, it would probably be sensible not to tell me again that it takes 3 to 5 years to implement digital technology. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Caroline, and thanks to all of you. It was interesting, Colin said when he started that he was apologising for any duplication from previous speakers. I have to say, as a panel, it's always great when you hear what seem like consistent themes coming out from speakers on an occasion like this. because it feels as though there is something that's really worth focusing on and digging into. And there were some very clear, consistent themes that came out of those presentations about partnership, about collaboration, about innovation, about pace, and about understanding the right balance between a focus on the technical platform and a focus on the people and the relationships. Just before I come to pose a couple of questions to the panel, I'm just going to encourage the people who are with us in this session listening to please do use the chat function. If there's anything that you would like me to put to either individual panelists or all the panelists on your behalf, this is your opportunity to type that in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll be coming to those after we've had a bit of a chat amongst ourselves here. I think we've maybe briefly lost Lorraine, but we've got everyone else here. And I wanted to start, colleagues, by coming to this point about collaboration and partnership. We at Carnegie have done quite a lot of work over the last few months, listening in on many of the communities and organisations that we've worked with over the last 5 years. And if there's one consistent thing we've heard, irrespective of the issue, it's that in that moment of crisis, people pushed down barriers that they had spent the last 5 years arguing were insurmountable. They worked together in new ways. They, as David so eloquently put it, kind of stopped to kind of put the egos aside. And I think it was Donald who talked about not caring what uniforms people were wearing or what badges were on the uniforms. So something has happened in this moment of crisis that has enabled a focus on getting it right for the individual that we all know, our collective guilty knowledge, we don't always manage in peacetime. So I think my first question for you is, what do we do from your perspective to make sure that when we come to the perhaps slightly sunnier uplands of 2021 and beyond, everybody doesn't just snap back behind the barriers, focusing on the uniforms, putting the egos back on? And David, I'm going to come to you first. If you didn't mind, what would you want to do that would create the conditions without having an ongoing pandemic to make that work?
That's the $1 million question. I think back to Donald's point really is about the focus on people and what they want. I mean, I think lots of digital transformation just now has come by the willing and where the services have wanted to move, and there's been engaged leaders that have had real vision for change, which is great, and we'll have seen some exciting things happen. But actually, what would be the priorities for citizens to engage digitally, and how do we collectively respond to that? So yes, services need to be designed around citizens, and so what would the public want to see? What do they find difficult at the moment? What would they like to see more of? How would they like to engage? I think that is needs to be the big driver, putting the citizens at the heart.
And David, you've been around that territory for quite a long time. And if there's a particular kind of one or two behaviours that frustrated you pre-2020 that you have seen kind of melt away, what are the ones that you'd really, really not want to see coming back?
I suppose it's that back to that bit about trust. That partners across sectors have expertise, and actually we've trusted people to get on and do things. We've trusted the insights from organisations that work closely with people. We've trusted frontline staff and their feedback. So I think it is that trust. Let's focus on shared priorities. Let's trust people and their expertise. That would be what I would like to see continue.
Thanks, David. Donald, you spoke about trust as well, and I'm interested in your perspective on what might go on creating fertile conditions for trust in this context as we move into 2021.
I suppose for me, it's essentially reflecting back, but also moving forward. It has to do with communication. So trust in any relationship is built on the basis of communication, and any communication understands that you need to discover what the language is of the other person. So at times, I think in too many instances in the tech and in the social care and in the health worlds, we're good at talking our own language, but it becomes a dialect of exclusion. So what we need to do moving forward is to learn to communicate better, not to presume that we know somebody else on their story and their sector, and to be prepared to listen to that which is sometimes uncomfortable. Like, for instance, as David said, you know, it's become extremely clear the shocking levels of digital exclusion which are preventing those who access social care from really benefiting from the potential. So communication is essential. But secondly, recognising how important it is to have the right people present. One of the most inspiring people I ever met with was a disability civil rights campaigner, Judith Snow, who is a Canadian, and she said, there is no point in talking about inclusion and assuming that inclusion means me physically being present. Because if you don't change your world to properly, then my presence is irrelevant. So in tech and in digital, I think we have to understand, what does inclusion really mean? It's not just having the machine, it's not just having accessibility, but it's about enabling confidence and capacity in people to feel as if they're there, to feel as if they're involved, and to be trusted and heard.
Thanks very much. Colin, I'm going to come to you next. I'm interested in this. One of the things we're talking is kind of recognising that different actors in the system have got different roles to play, and they have to respect the skills that different people bring to the table. And I suppose in your role, you're very much an enabler and somebody who creates the spaces or the conditions for different parts of not just the public sector, but the public and private sector to come together. And one of the things that you'll have missed Lorraine saying at the beginning was how helpful it had been to see the public and private sector come together during this period of time. So I'm interested to see what you see as the opportunities in those shared spaces for the months ahead, and what it is that you would most like to capture in those spaces that builds trust between different sectors and different players.
Thank you. And yes, I've seen a lot of that. I mentioned a few of them in my opening, and role in government is creating those spaces, whether that's the high level framework. We love all sectors need to operate, and that's why we're setting out a consultation on the digital strategy. Those principles agreed, or it's practical sense. Our CivTech Innovation Centre, where we take individual public sector challenges, and inclusivity is part of that, and we try and attract, whatever it might be, or and beyond, to come and positions on the back of that. I'm very about what's going to happen. We've seen not of part, also there's an understanding digital isn't the enemy of persons that an impact with people. It can actually and should, if we take digital in the round of its culture and skills and processes and add people, is more reactive. So I think we start in a very strong, the need to create across the sectors is one around leadership. It's about getting it seen and understood that the purpose of leadership, particularly in the sector that I present and that others on this panel work in, is about our people. The organizational trappings of the number of people we have working for us, or the number of elements of in-house. It comes for people, and if we get to be seen in the potential, because we within the leadership sector, I need to that matter most to the people I serve, people designing services around them, and I don't to do the things that you operate, use common platforms, do market, do them in, because they don't vehicle for me to allocate my resources, people and money, to helping the people I serve. Kind of standing in a really powerful position in Scotland going.
Thanks so much, Colin. Caroline, I was really struck by your comment in the end about, don't bring me a 5-year excuse when I've seen what you can do in 5 months. And I'm really interested in this question of pace. And again, it came through many of the things we've heard this morning. But we know that the shadow side of pace is sometimes that you don't have the space to be as strategic as you might want to be. And there's also a risk that you get duplication as people are doing their own thing because they need to move quickly. So I'm interested from your perspective of the kind of imperative for the beginning of next year about how you don't slacken off on the ambition in terms of scale, but are you optimistic that there will be the space to make good judgments about what you want to learn from what's happened and how you want to shape services for the future in the way that people have been describing this morning?
Thanks, Sarah. So I think for me, that comes back to, okay, reflecting on how we've achieved that pace. And it has been around people united around a single purpose and being therefore prepared to collaborate, and in terms of each bringing their own contribution towards achieving the end that we have in mind. And I absolutely agree with what other people have said, that this, at the end of the day, this has got to be about what people want and what people need and want from digital services. And for me as well, I think that imperative remains, because when we come out the other side of this pandemic, which we will be coming out with a significant amount of harm having been inflicted on our society, on our economy, and with, at the end of the day, the pain of this has been felt by people across the world, but in our context, across Scotland. And I think we owe it to them to make sure that they are up the front of our of helping us to make those strategic decisions about where we focus our priorities. And I think that it is possible to carry on moving forward quickly and incrementally. So I don't think this is about, coming up with a big master plan. I think it's very much about identifying areas where we can make small and rapid improvements and just getting on and delivering those. I guess one of my other reflections has been that we have had to be a little less risk averse than we might be in normal times. We've had to take a chance on some things, and we've had to be prepared to say, actually, that didn't work that well, so let's try something different instead. And I think we all need to retain that mindset as well, that we don't carry on doing something just because we said that was the way in which we do it. If it's not working, if it's not producing the outcomes that we need and that people of Scotland deserve and that they want, then we should be brave enough to say, you know what, we're going to stop this and we're going to try doing it differently. So I think there is room for small innovations that have the potential to join up and produce a bigger whole, rather than think of a bigger complete thing, rather than thinking that we start and sort of try and direct everything top down.
So it's really interesting, Caroline, that you ended with that, because that was the final point I was about to come to in the discussion with the panel, which is essentially about the dialogue with the public about these issues. And we know that if you're moving fast and you're innovating, then almost by definition, you have to have the confidence to take some risks. And the quid pro quo for that, particularly in the public sector, is that you're prepared to learn from those risks and to build differently in the future. But equally, we know that there is a media and political context which doesn't always make that straightforward for people operating in the public sector. And clearly, when we're talking about issues as sensitive and personal to people as their health and social care, public trust and confidence in the system is absolutely fundamental. So I'm going to come to each of you before we go to the panel now, so before we go to the questions, just to ask you to reflect for a moment on what you would see as the key imperative for continuing to build on the degree of public kind of assent and commitment to digital that we saw from the data that was used earlier has clearly already begun to move in the right direction. And I'm going to start with David for that one.
I think, yeah, there's a huge, going back to that kind of needs of citizens again, it would be great to have, real insight from people to drive that what we need. I think we're always the risk. The risks often has dominated our decisions in the past about whether to do it. Are we worried about real or imagined things around data protection or what the citizen will think about this? So let's ask, let's build our kind of strategies around those user stories. We talk about service design. There's very simple that as a user, I want to do this. Shouldn't our strategies be full of what users want to do? And users could be citizens, they could be members of staff. Yeah, rather than thinking about how we transform a service, how do we enable those actions that people want to take to be done digitally?
Donald, your reflections on building increased confidence.
Yeah, very similar to David. We are brilliant in Scotland at creating innovative, dynamic legislation, and we are absolutely Olympic to then sit in that legislation and fail to implement it properly. So, and self-directed support is the classic. We've got the most innovative social care legislation anywhere in the world, and we failed in the last few years to implement it. So what I would do is empower the citizen, trust the citizen, take citizen control over personal data as an example, use that as the basis to enable that sense of ownership and empowerment. And we will be surprised because around risk, around protection will evaporate when people have control and are properly empowered. But we, and I include myself, but we're all of us too frightened and tentative to take that step of properly empowering the citizen, because if we do, then our concerns will be minimized. But there's so much within the system, be it political, media, corporate, that prevents us from taking that step into the future.
Thanks, Donald. Colin, would you like to reflect on that as somebody who maybe sits at the nexus of somewhere where also those risks feel as though they come together?
The first is that I think if we all commit ourselves to what we just Scottish approach to service, to the commitment to have a user whenever a design is taken in regard of a service, and but if we commit to be accountable for its use in everything, we take a huge leap forward and we build public. Donald, is that is a great democracy. It keeps it promotes openness. It promotes ability. Power into the hands of the consumer or the user, depending which term you prefer. To be typical that in action, and one of the first of those, and one of the things that we're working on in the Scottish Government, will be the way of this conundrum about having a common approach to digital identity. Is the friction and cost of accessing. At Scotland, we're setting out to have a common identity where data and permissions to share your data is held by the citizen in a citizen and not held in some database that understand or can't control. And I think that is a kind of fundamental demonstration, and a particularly very powerful demonstration if we can get it right. Digital nation that we want to become.
Thanks, Colin. And you've neatly segued me there into picking up some of the questions that are now coming on the chat on the right. There was one from Emma Gillis about the plans in place to have a unique identifier for the citizen to allow the holistic view of them and their data. And I think that connects very much to what you've just been saying about the work that's underway at the moment in terms of data. I'm going to come now to a question. Yes, I was about to come back to Caroline, but she's just left, so I'm not going to do that. Donald, I know that this is a question that's been much debated in the last few months, which has been about the relationship between the health service and the care service in Scotland. And Martin Williamson here is asking about whether this is the time to bite the bullet and move towards a national care service, recognising the essential nature of both social care and healthcare. And I wondered if you'd be interested in commenting on that, possibly particularly through the lens that we're talking about today. In other words, the kind of bringing together of services around the individual and the breaking down of boundaries between services and between those who provide the services.
So so there has been an awful lot of talk about a national care service, and apart from one or two people who have used it, it by and large has become a soundbite without substance. But there are characteristics of a national care service which certainly fit into the discussions we're having today. So it is absolutely appropriate that we have citizens in control of their lives and independence. And that's what social care is all about. It's not a clinical set of services. It's not a one size fits all. I certainly don't want to have no choice, as I do often in elements of my clinical care. So we cannot equate social care with the NHS, and I think most of us working in social care don't perceive a national care service as offering that. But if it is about offering a totality which is modelled on my well-being, which integrates the data which I own and have access to in the pathway of my support from being at home all the way in through clinical services in an NHS hospital and all the way back out, if it enables my care and support in my own home to speak to my particular needs and to design that care and support around my needs, then yes, there is a fundamental truth, which is that we need a national care service. And the last thing I'd say on this is that one of the benefits of talking nationally is that we have equality of treatment for workers and staff with national terms and conditions. And in terms of our digital context, we have real potential, untapped potential, that the women and men who work in social care and in health are the ones who are going to be the pioneers of technology and digital. They are much further ahead, much more adventurous than the system or those of us who manage the system. And that's what I mean when I meant empowerment. If we empower people to create answers to our questions and responses to our needs, then we will get, whatever you call it, a national care system, or indeed social care which is embodying the human rights of individuals. We will get what we want, and technology can help us to enable that to happen.
And there's a truth there, Donald, isn't there, about the way in which those who are working, as they say, at the front line, but by that we mean in the closest relationships with the people to whom they provide care, are the people who are most immediately motivated day to day to want to improve their lives as much as they can. And I think that notion of the ideas and the stimulus and the innovation coming from the front line and being supported by the systems that help them is absolutely the right way to think about it. David, you obviously take a particular interest in the way in which the voluntary community sector can support people. And I just wondered, from your perspective, thinking about this kind of holistic vision, as somebody calls it here, recognising that people don't think of their lives as being separated into the interaction with the health service or the housing service or the social care service. It all comes together for them. And thinking about the voluntary and community sector in the future, what role do you see there for people who are working, as I was just describing it, most closely with individuals who are receiving care in terms of driving innovation?
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to the trust people. I think that on that point of a health and care service, kind of health and well-being and care is provided by a whole range of or enabled by a whole range of organisations across sectors, and it's how we recognise, who contributes to an individual's life. What's their choice, and what do they want to do, and how do we enable that? I think at the moment one of the challenges for many voluntary and community organisations that might provide kind of health and care services is the disconnect between with public services. They're commissioned, they're perhaps either commissioned and then have to report back in 32 different ways to 32 different councils, and there's data and interoperability issues around systems that come up before. But there's then issues of organisations that, you know, the voluntary community sector ought to be saying a place that they can go when the kind of health and care service can't provide any, or the kind of public sector can't provide, and they're perhaps seen as offloading a burden without the financial kind of recompense to do that. So I think there's lots of issues, but again, if we place the citizen at start, what's best for them, what do they want to do, what's there that's going to enable them to achieve what they want, that's the most important thing to focus on.
So I started this session off by saying how useful it was to be able to raise our eyes from what's happening immediately on our doorsteps and looking at best practice elsewhere, either in other parts of the UK or indeed internationally. And Ness has just put the question in the chat for delegates to share any examples of things that they've seen happening Firth of Scotland, which have inspired them. So I was going to close the session by inviting each of you as panelists, if there's anything that you've seen happening in other parts of the UK or abroad, and if there's something that you've come across within Scotland that you think is as good practice as there is anywhere in the world, then please give that a shout out. And I'll come to Colin first of all.
Oh, I think, forgive me for taking the Scotland line on that. Being involved to the conclusion, should, you know, genuinely believe they've done something world leading. I also think we've had a little bit of talk about innovation here. I think the CivTech system that we have for innovating in public services challenges is world leading, and we know because we have governments in something called a CivTech International Alliance together, collaborating, because many of the public services challenges, many of the health and care challenges that we face here are the same that are being faced in Lithuania and Portugal and Greece and the other countries that are in. We can share ideas, and perhaps even more importantly, from an economic, if we can develop solutions, we have ready international markets for. So I think, look, the digital world is an interconnected connected one, therefore that flow of information, that flow of inspiration and ideas across boundaries has to be at the heart of what we do, and we constantly learn. You know, I was talking about identity is from all on exchanged information on things. Tech Scotland app with, you know, major international corporations and other governments. So it's really an exciting place to be.
Thanks so much. Donald, where would you like to talk to?
Oh gosh, this is difficult. Well, near me has already been mentioned. We've already heard Connecting Scotland and the work in care homes in terms of connectivity being mentioned. I'll choose two things, if I may, very quickly. One is that I think what we've achieved collaboratively around the development of a TOURAS platform to support care homes during the pandemic has been quite remarkable, from wire design to implementation, and will, I think, offer real dynamic change to those who are residents in care homes for years to come. The second thing I would highlight is some of the amazing work happening all over Scotland, but also in the United Kingdom, where we are, to go back to an earlier theme, empowering frontline workers to be aware of the potential of digital devices and the Internet of Things in individuals' homes. That connection between the way people live their lives and their health and social care information is, I think, something we can do a lot more on. We need to put a lot more energy in to enable independence where people want to be independent. But we need that to be truly collaborative and truly cross-sectoral. So the seeds are there. We need to nourish them. And out of that, I think we will have a real technological revolution with the rights of the individual at the heart of the fruit.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Donald. And last word to you, David. What's your shout out to?
Yeah, as kind of Colin and Donald mentioned, I think a lot of the work here that we're doing in Scotland is kind of really world leading and transformational, and kind of particularly the stuff that I've been involved in around digital inclusion and connecting Scotland has been, there's nothing else that I can recognise around the world that's done that. I suppose just to go techie for a minute and indulge my passion for the geeky side. I mean, actually, we do live in this global technology world, and we need to recognise that, and we don't always need to develop things on our own. It's about how we reduce, reuse, and recycle kind of technology, the kind of cloud stuff that we talked about. And actually, the Protect Scotland app for me is a great example. That built on that infrastructure developed by Google and Apple, used in other countries, and we kind of took that, adapted it, made it our own. It didn't mean building things from scratch, and that's where we need to go. We're not unique, and actually that happens across organisations at all levels. When you're using technology, you're probably not unique. Someone else has solved this problem. Well, let's not reinvent wheels.
Thanks, David. That's a really good note to finish on. I'm hugely grateful to you all, Colin, David, Donald, and also to Lorraine and Caroline for sharing your reflections back on 2020 and your hopes for 2021. That's it for this session, and I'd like to finish by wishing everybody all the very best for the remainder of DigiFest. And it's absolutely no doubt that the issues this year are of absolutely fundamental importance, and the sense of possibility and potential is massive. So let's grab that and make the most of it while we can. Thanks very much to everybody. Bye-bye.